Hey, I'm Ramvi, and you're watching us on Dom of X.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Dom of X. I am the assistant editor of comicreleases.com, and today I have creator and writer of titles such as Blue and Green, The Savage Shores, Many Deaths of Laila Starr, Justice League Dark, Grafity's Wall, Rare Flavours, Catwoman, Venom, Carnage, Aquaman Andromeda, most recently Detective Comics, and of course, New Gods for DC All In. I am talking with Eisner Award winning writer Ramvi. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, things are good.
Awesome. Well, I see that things are good because I saw before backstage, you had the brand new PC. Apparently, it came in from it looks great, and I love the
Yeah,
colors that it
it
has
looks a bit
too.
nuts. Yeah.
But yes, I'd like to thank you for having you here and everything else. And before we start this interview off, I did order this cover of New Gods. I guess I got to show off to the world. It's the Acetate variant with Evan Cagle, where you open it up and it's
Yeah.
Metron. It's all beautiful, all interlaced. Did you get your?
Have you ordered the acetates for the next couple of issues as well?
I did pick them up for issue 2, and I still need to put in my orders for 3 and 4. But
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So they're kind of cool, and I think we're doing an exclusive reveal here, so that might be kind of cool.
Okay.
The back cover of these acetates
Mm-hmm.
is supposed to be a kind of puzzle to solve, but I mean, not really a puzzle, but it does a cool thing where if you take the back cover of every acetate of issue 1, 2, and 3, and you layer them on top of each other with that back cover as the base, um, you get to see the design of the new god, like
Ooh,
the final form, the final design, if
I
you
love
will.
that. Was that something that you and Evan like sort of thought about, drawn
Yeah,
up, or?
yeah. I mean, we talked with DC about doing something cool for the book, and they were like, well, here's a bunch of things we can do. And Evan and I were both like, yeah, we just don't want to just do a gimmick. We want to do something that feels narratively engaging. So he said, if we want to do acetates, or if we want to do any kind of cool covers, why don't we do something that feels like the people who are collecting them are collecting, part of a new mythology, if you
Mm,
will. And so this idea that you are collecting these almost Kabbalic texts that you put together to see the design of a new god is kind of cool.
that is super cool. And honestly, A+ for throwing in Kabbalic into an interview. I never thought that I would hear any like that, but that is so cool that DC not only allowed you guys to do that, but to be able to give collectors or readers like me
Yeah,
I guess more of an incentive to pick these up. And a cool thing added, because sometimes I feel like gimmick covers are just there for gimmicks. They're there to get the company like $1 more in sales or whatever.
yeah.
But the fact that like you guys threw something in there as if you put these together, you get something even greater out of it, and you're putting yourself in there too. Like that is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, it's not a difficult thing to do, right? So all you have to do is I don't know, burn a few brain cells and try to figure out why the gimmick matters rather than have a gimmick that's kind of meaningless, if you will. And sure, yeah, everything is to make $1 more, but then you've got to give someone something in return for that dollar. And in this
Right.
case, we're giving that sort of sensation of going, I'm the first who gets to put together, or I'm one of the first who gets to put together this design. Nobody else, none of the people who don't have this acetate are going to be able to sort of put that design together before he actually shows up many issues down the line in the comics. So it is kind of cool. Yeah.
That I love it. I can't wait to put in my order for issue 3. I still have to get, obviously issue 2 hasn't come out yet, but I still need to put in my orders for 3. And obviously a lot of the covers for the run have been spectacular. There's the incentive that Carmine, DG, and Domenico did. that I thought was
Yeah,
pretty awesome.
yeah,
I just wish I had enough money to be able to afford all of these great looking variants to add to
sure.
my collection. But no doubt that is awesome. Maybe when they come out in the trade paperback, oversized hardcover collections like they do, we'll get to see the puzzle thrown in there for those who might have missed out. I don't
Oh
know.
yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
But yes, that is awesome to hear. But let's backtrack a bit because I want to talk to you not only about New Gods, but your career, your start in it. How did it start for you in comics? How did you get into the medium, and how'd you break in?
Well, I'd always wanted to be a writer, not particularly in comics, but I just loved the act of writing. And I had started writing when I was about 13 years of age, so that part of it began very early for me. Um, but in terms of comics, I think 2013 was the first year I decided to write a bit seriously and kind of follow my passion, if you will. And I had a few prose things published here and there. And moved to the UK to study creative writing. And I'd always loved and read comics, just never contemplated the idea of writing them. And then someone close to me mentioned the fact that my writing style was quite visual and that I should try. Have you ever written a graphic novel or a
Mhm.
comic? And it's like, I wonder what that's like. And so, yeah, I just put together my first ever comic in 2015, 2016, something like that. Um, and kickstarted it, and it did really well. It was a book about crime noir stories set in Mumbai without there being any actual crime in the
Mhm.
stories. So, um, yeah, it did really well, and that kind of got me jump started in comics. I sent that book out to a few editors here and there, and they all seemed to sort of respond to the work and gave me opportunities to do more things.
And now, obviously, you're writing one of the most big cosmic entities that you can do in the DC universe.
Sure.
You're doing Batman for DC, spectacular run. Obviously, getting on books like
Thank you.
Catwoman and taking over
Yeah.
Justice League Dark. I mean, that must have been quite the upwards transition for you, getting to see your career sort of evolve into it.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that element of like, am I the only one thinks who thinks I'm any good, right? And I've always been someone who didn't need the external validation to keep doing what I was doing. So it was never quite that sense of like, ah, yes, look, everyone's appreciating my work. But um, I do tend to, especially at times like these, end of the year, Christmas, I kind of turn back and look at what did I accomplish this year? And yeah, it does. I would be facetious if I didn't say that. Yeah, since 2016 to here is about 8 years. It feels like I've covered some ground in 8 years. Yeah,
It's been big for me getting to sort of see because I got attached onto your work with Justice League Dark because I heard that you were taking the
sure.
title over from James Tynion, and I
Yeah,
figured let me give the because I never had heard your name in comics before because I was a
yeah,
teenager reading DC New 52 stuff went under the radar. The next thing you know, it's like, oh, there's this brand new person who's on Justice League Dark and he's gonna be taking over Catwoman, and I was like, I need to see what they're doing, and
yeah.
ends up you end up being one of my favorite writers now. So that has been really cool to see you progress as your career has headed on and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, it really was after I did a book called These Savage Shores, and James Tynan, who was on Justice League Dark at the time, read that, and he was the one who put me through to his editor, Brittany Holzer at the time, and Brittany had actually read my Kickstarter published black and white book. So you see, it is always a long game. Um, and she was assistant editor at the
Mm-hmm.
time to Jamie Rich, who I had originally given my Kickstarted book to. And until all of this kind of came together, Jamie had just never read. I give him a lot of shit about it, but he had never actually read my book. Um, and then, yeah, it's kind of at the end of this, Jamie kind of went like, "Oh yeah, my assistant a different assistant editor. I think it was Maggie Howell. She had read Black Mamba and had passed it on to Jamie, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm on the train to San Diego, and we should really talk about doing some stuff together."
Mm,
And we talked about doing a working on a Vertigo book, and that never kind of panned out because Jamie became back group editor,
right.
and that was kind of my first thing at DC where he was like, "Do you want to come write a Batman story for me?"
So yeah, I mean, obviously, I know that Vertigo eventually would transition to Black Label,
Mm-hmm.
and you would get a lot
Yeah,
of the.
this
Okay.
was still when it was called Vertigo.
Oh man,
Yeah,
2018. Yeah, that's a decent long time ago. But
yeah.
that is impressive, and obviously, again, getting to see your work pan out has been absolutely tremendous. Do you have a writing schedule? Is it you go to the office and you try to get your scripts out, just lock in, no distractions, or is it on and off? I'll do one part of a script and then move on to the next. How does that work out for you, if I may ask?
I mean, I wish I could tell you that there was a schedule. There used to be a schedule once upon a time, and then I had a kid, and then we moved house, and I have no schedule now, and I struggle, and my productivity is like down in the dumps. But hopefully, so this is actually a temp. I mean, this is the house we bought, but it's a temporary house because we're going to be moving out,
Mm-hmm.
doing the place up from scratch again, and then move back in 8 months. So ask me again in 8 months, and I'll probably have a schedule because I have an office out in the. So it's got a little woods in the back of the house, so I have an
Ooh.
office in there. But yeah, when my schedule used to be pretty tight, I used to do two writing sessions. One at around 11. I mean, I would wake up at 10, so one at around 11, 11:30 in the morning for about 3 hours. So 11:30 to 3, let's say. And then a second writing session that would probably be a little bit longer, say 4 hours ish from about 11 p.m. to 3 in the morning. So that used to be my routine.
And now, obviously, with the kid, it's kind of you need to spend some time with them, figure everything
Yeah,
else
yeah,
out
and
later.
also like it's not fair, especially during the Christmas holidays. It's not
Hmm.
fair for me to be like check out during the day and be like,
Right.
nope, sorry, I'm gonna go write for 4 hours while you know, mommy and my kid go hang out and do something. So yeah, you know what, life happens, things
Right.
change, and you gotta figure out your way around them.
Well, I have to get you back in 8 months, back on the channel so we could see your office. We could do a tour, something like that. That would be super cool to
Yeah,
see.
yeah, yeah.
But obviously, I want to talk to you. And first of all, congratulations on a spectacular #1 issue launch with New Gods, with Evan
Thank you.
Cagle, Jorge Fornes, and everybody else who has been absolutely tremendous on the book. Can't say enough amazing things about the first issue. I was floored. But if I have to ask, how did you land the gig with New Gods? Was this something that was years in the making that you always wanted to do? And how did you get about to it for the DC All In initiative?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, my equation at DC has always been a case of DC editors coming to me and going, "What do you want to do?" Because I kind of got into doing any big two work off of stuff that I had already done, and so it wasn't as much of a gig as a okay, Ram, what do you want to do? And then I said, I want to do New Gods, and they said, what? No one buys New Gods. Why do you want to do New Gods? And then I said, it's exactly why I wanted to do Gods. No one buys it, but it's cool and weird and strange, and I get to reinvent because the book's not been around in a few years. You have to understand, I was coming off of a almost 2 year run on Detective,
Hmm.
where with Detective you can do a lot of new things, as we did with the run. I don't think there's ever been an operatic take on Batman
Hmm.
in comics, but fundamentally, Batman is still Batman, and changing, reinventing that is a much bigger mountain to climb because everyone wants to have a say and an opinion because he's on a whatever million Tiffin boxes and a
Hmm.
gazillion T-shirts. But with something like New Gods, It's like, yeah, what's the worst that could happen? The
Right.
book won't sell, as like it hasn't sold for how many ever years before
Hmm.
this. Um, which is, to be honest, like an argument I use. Sometimes they go like, "Why are we changing this character?" I'm like, "Yeah, because the 10,000 people who bought the last time you did this book will care."
Right.
Uh, you know, um, so it is really freeing in that sense to be able to completely do a new take on something. And look, it reinvigorates if it's done correctly and well. It reinvigorates the property. Like, I'm not. I don't think I'm out of place in saying like issue one sales are the biggest numbers this title has ever seen in its publishing history, which is kind of cool. Yeah.
That is absolutely spectacular and great to hear because I want to support the heck out of the series and ensure that you get the longest running take on whatever editorial and publishing staff will allow you to do.
Nice. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And look, I think DC are appreciative of the fact that yeah, when sometimes my takes can be off of left field, but when they click, they work. So yeah.
yeah, that has been awesome to see. Are they your favorite cosmic property in DC? Is this something that you went, man, I
I don't
love
really
Jack?
have favorite properties, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, I get this question a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
like, who's your favorite character if you ever could write one? And I never know how to answer it because I don't really have favorite characters. I don't really have an attachment to characters in a lot of way that I understand
Mm-hmm.
people do, partly because I never grew up with these characters. Like, if people ask me what character do you really have an attachment to, the most they're gonna get from me is Phantom
Mm-hmm.
because those are the comics I read when I was growing up as a
Right.
kid. Um, like I would absolutely flip out if I was asked to write an Asterix the Gaul comic because I grew up with Asterix. I didn't grow up with Batman, Superman, Green Lantern, any of these things. Partly because I was in India and these books weren't easily
Mm.
available there. And so my favorite thing about these characters and DC and the cosmic DC in general is that all comes out of stories I've read. And so, and I've read these stories, as a 17, 18, 19-year old. Like I read the Starman omnibus. I read I've read Green Lantern before, and
Mm-hmm.
and now when I read these things, my brain's always going like, oh, what can I do with it?
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes I'll get an idea. Like the New Gods idea was born simply off of going like, I want to do something with a huge cast.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to take on something that feels like I'm taking 40 different players. Like I love Dune, right? The novel, and the Denis Villeneuve films, and it's got such a huge cast.
Mm-hmm.
Like what one person does on one planet has ramifications, not only through space on another planet, but also through time on entire civilizations to come. And I felt like I'm gonna do something like that in comics, and I literally went like, okay, what's a property that will let me do that? And I went, well, there's a whole universe that Jack Kirby created um, at DC that I was already aware of. And I went, no one's doing anything with it, so why don't I take that and make this kind of my Dune-ish take on the DC mythos?
That is awesome to hear, and you are clearly shaped by mythology in this book. It's no surprise that you're using different elements from so many different other stories and obvious source material that's been placed before. Besides Dune, do you have any other recommendations for people who want to get into the deep mythology or stuff that it's like other things that you were inspired by? I guess would be my question.
I mean, a lot of what I'm doing structurally comes from Hindu mythology and the sort of eschatology myth that is part of Hindu mythology, that is the end of Kali Yuga and the coming of the last avatar of God. I've just taken that
Mm-hmm.
structure and I've woven a DC universe story around it,
So
if
cool.
you will. Um, and I think that's gonna play off really well. That's gonna play off really interesting. And then obviously things with huge casts like Dune, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings. Those are all interesting epics to look at because they have such huge casts and they meander to so many different places and yet feel like a cohesive story was told because there are these kind of big tentpole beats that happen. I mean, you know, you think of Lord of the Rings, yes, of course you remember the Return of the King and
Mm-hmm.
the ghosts all coming off the ships
Mm-hmm.
and the blade sword of Anduil
Mm-hmm.
is reforged and it's great. But you have to remember there's also like bits about hobbits traveling through a forest
Mm-hmm.
and seeing stone trolls, which connects to a previous book or the history of Lord of the Rings. And so yeah, I felt like this was the place to do something like that, where yeah, of course you're gonna remember the big tentpole beats, but there's also like weird little meanderings and tangential stories that will be told in this run.
Which is something that I can't wait for, and also something that we got a lot of in issue one because you have to spend time in Apocalypse on New Genesis and obviously on planet Earth with Scott
Yeah,
Free and Barda. So,
yeah, but everything is still centrally connected to the
right.
story.
Mm-hmm.
Even in issue one, everything that happens is about the main plot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you get to issue three, you're gonna get like a history lesson as to why we've ended up where we are with the main plot. Now, that doesn't actually have anything to do in a big way with the main plot, but
Mm-hmm.
I feel like reading that makes the universe and the world and the DC mythos feel so much bigger that it's worth spending that issue on. Same thing with there's going to be an issue further down the line which is entirely focused on the Black Racer and what he does, and so yeah, there's going to be issues like that that don't necessarily thread in or move the main plot forward immediately, but expand your understanding of the mythos and make you care about these characters a little bit more.
Well, that is awesome to hear and something that I can't wait for. Because I want to see a lot of what's happening on behind the scenes with the foundation that you already set between
Yeah,
these three different worlds. And I think that's part of what makes a run like this cool is that you get to see different perspectives told on different planets with different players all coming about and
yeah,
sort of we're getting this grand story, but all of the elements that are happening in each part of the book are going to be central parts of whatever the plot is going to be and how it moves forward.
yeah, absolutely.
So cannot wait for that. And I guess my question would be, how when you write the script, how do you figure out time to balance between all of the different plot points? Is it you give out say 4 to 6 pages for this? I'm gonna lock in and give this to whatever Scott and Barda are doing, or what Ryan is doing. How do you balance and figure that out when you are writing that script?
Well, it's like breathing, to an extent. Like um, your chest muscles have to tense up and relax in a rhythmic way for your body to continue breathing. And a story works in a very similar way. The narrative tension has to squeeze and relax rhythmically for the story to continue breathing and continue to have a life. And um, yeah, if you have a particularly tense story that just keeps getting more and more tense, you never have at least a semblance of relief,
Mm-hmm.
then it's going to feel lopsided. It's not going to have rhythm. It's not going to have pacing. You don't have time to consider everything that has happened. On the other side, if you have something that just feels totally relaxing, it's going to feel loose and lazy and
Right.
boring. Um, and so I think that's what drives my decisions more than anything else. So I go like, okay, we've had this kind of interesting start, which is this kind of grand cosmic tale that has no internal conflict, only a point of interest in that, oh, the source is making some kind of prophecy. And then you get a quieter scene with Highfather and Metron. But you can see the seeds of internal conflict between Highfather and Metron, with Metron making this prophecy and going, well, it's up to you to choose what you have to do. And then the conflict ramps up a bit more. You get Orion fighting parademons, and Orion's being given a task, but we don't find out what that task is.
Right.
So you've got that as a reader, you've got that internal tension of wait, what was Orion asked to do? But then I take you away, I put you on Earth, and you're looking at Scott and Barda, and you have a different kind of tension there to contend with, like, oh my God, he's trying to be a father, and you know, he doesn't know how to do any of this. And then you see Orion show up there, and you're like, well, what's Orion doing here? And then you get the answer to what Orion's been asked, and now everything feels like super high point of tension. You get these two brothers talking, which actually, like, I love writing and I love breaking down writing. It's like it's really hard to do a story where your highest point of tension is two brothers on a park bench talking to each other, and then still have people go like, "Oh man, issue one was great." Like I don't think people realize like it's hard to do high points of tension in quiet suburban Glendale, California scenes.
It is, yeah.
But it works because as a writer, you're looking underneath the hood and going, cool, my dramatic tension is exactly where it needs to be.
Because I always felt on the edge of my seat, even from the start, when I'm introduced to whatever the source is doing, whatever this prophecy is, and what all is going to be told. I thought the midpoint or the highest point for the book for me was Highfather and Light Ray talking, in the middle of the book, and
Yeah,
obviously getting the shift to the middle, and I'm like, okay, Earth, I can finally relax. It's like dad, kid, and mom time, mom sleeping, and then I'm going like, wait, these two are on a bench. They're arguing over something, and it feels like it had a higher moment of stress for me reading because I don't know
yeah,
what was going on, but I can tell you that I was just as, if not more, on the edge of my seat than I was when Highfather and like we were trying to figure out what was going on.
yeah, yeah. And Light Ray's got this. I love doing that with characters where it's easy to go good, bad, happy, sad. It's harder to go like, oh, that was an uncomfortable moment. I don't know how to emotionally contend with that. How do you emotionally contend with someone coming in going like, Dad, I'm here. I'm here to help you. And then the father goes, oh no, not you. Where's my other son? So that's really hard to contend with. And again, a source of dramatic tension. So yeah.
Because I can't tell you how many times that, because I have a younger brother who's in high school, I'm in college, and sometimes like when my dad tells me to do stuff, I can sort of like see, like my brother asks like, hey, can I do this? And then my dad's like, no, like your older brother can do whatever the thing needs to be done. Like for example, like last week it was like putting up a bookshelf for Christmas because we
Yeah.
have family over the holidays.
Yeah.
I'm looking over in the corner. I'm like, wait, he looks mad. Like, did I do something to upset him? So it felt like that in the moment. I was like, wait, I just read this not too long ago. Oh, that's right, New Gods. So it felt like
Yeah.
a piece of
Yeah.
myself was in this book.
And that's what every writer is aiming for. Whether you're telling stories about gods or you're telling stories about brothers on Earth, they should all feel like, oh, I know what this is, even if it's the fates of entire universes hang in the balance. But I know this feeling, and I think that is the greatest success of any storyteller is to tell a wildly inventive, imaginative thing and still be able to find a kernel of familiarity for the reader within it.
Because I think the beauty of a lot of these heroes, villains, or people that we read in our fiction, we want to be able to see the humanity in them because we need a connective
Yeah,
tissue that
yeah,
allows.
yeah. I'd mentioned this in an interview somewhere, and one of the YouTube comments that someone linked to me was like, "Well, they're gods. How can he say they're human?" I'm like, have you met any actual mythological gods? They're all so fundamentally human. That they're all meant to be cautionary tales. Essentially, every great world mythology, before we turned it into religion and we started praying to every great world mythology was essentially stories about look at these idiots, don't be like
Mm-hmm.
them. Um, you know, don't brother kill brother over kingdoms. Don't eat your children because you are jealous of
Mm.
them sort of inheriting the world. These are all fundamentally human stories, and we turn them into stories about gods because it's easier to talk about things when they're on a scale that's entirely different to yours. Um, yeah, I feel like the whole point of mythology is that it's fundamentally human.
Yeah, that was something that in my last interview with Cy Spurrier, we talked about that with Flash, and the first thing that he brought up is like, cool, like these guys can run super fast. He can do all of these, has all these different powers, does all these different things. But you look at like any of the Greek gods, you pick out any one of the hat, and it's like the flawless is like the super long ABC. Like this is what's wrong, like about them or what they're doing, and I
Mm.
feel like you have to sort of add that to these mythical beings that sure like Darkseid, obviously he's not in the book but his presence is still out there. High Father, even Mr. Miracle, you look up to these characters, like they still mess up and do things that we humans probably should, but I feel like that's something that we can connect to as readers, and that knowing the people you're reading in this book don't exactly have everything figured out, and that there's still something flawed about them that we can look at and say like maybe we can learn from this, or anything of that sort.
Well, even if you don't learn from it, the fact that you can look at it and you go, "I recognize this," already means the story is beyond successful. So, um, yeah, I'm super glad to hear that.
Yeah, so I'm super happy to see that you're bringing that perspective over to your book, because I love it when I see my heroes fail. I know that it sounds weird to say, but it's something that I think is fundamental in every
I
single
mean,
book.
the victories don't matter if you never see them fail, right?
Mhm. Exactly. You can't win until you lose. Is this something I got
I
taught
mean,
at writing
winning
school?
only has meaning if you've ever lost before.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just, you know, it exists.
Right. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's important to have the failures in life so that we as people can aspire to be better. Um,
Yeah.
and that's something that I can't wait to hear. I guess my other questions about New Gods, that something that my friend actually asked me last night, because I told him, hey, like I'm interviewing Ram V tomorrow. He immediately gave me a call and was just like, I'm the most jealous person on earth. But one of the questions that he wanted to throw in was
Mm.
power levels. I guess some like something of the fandom sort where we have fun and say like which character can beat what of one
Sure.
another. But my question, I guess paraphrasing, is that obviously we have certain characters being stronger than others. Like obviously Superman is stronger than Wonder
Hmm.
Woman, and others like that. Would you say that Batman is, I guess, more like better strategist than Mr. Miracle is? Is Diana, is Wonder Woman stronger than Barda? Where would you rank them, I guess, on the DC power level tier, or however you would like to call it?
I mean, fundamentally, that kind of ranking stuff is super uninteresting to me, so I
Mm,
just don't do it.
right.
But it is interesting to me to be presented with a question of like, okay, why is Batman playing in the same sandbox as these characters,
Mhm.
right? And I know it's an age old, you know, internet meme conversation, like, oh, with enough planning time, Batman. But come on, like some of these guys can punch planets, you know.
Mhm.
I think the fundamentally interesting thing about Batman is not the ability to plan, because you know we've also seen Batman villains who have better ability to plan things. You know, technically the Riddler could be undoing all of New Gods
Mhm.
then, you know.
Yep.
But I think I think the interesting thing about Batman from a writer's perspective is that he's not planning out scenarios. He's reading people. And while Superman is a hero who looks at human beings and sees the best in them, my idea of Batman is that his ability to look at people and expect the worst from them almost is on a similar level to any godlike creature. So to be able to look at human beings and he goes, yes, I want you all to be good, but I know what you can do, the evil that you can do if you go unchecked. and I shall forever be the one who keeps watch against that evil. Now, if you take that idea and translate it, times a million into comic books, this is someone who would look at gods and go, "Oh, so you're a god? Great. Oh, so you have so much power. Wonderful. I look at you and all I see is the potential to do terrible, destructive things. And so I'm going to plan ahead in time for every single contingency for all the stuff that you could do, which nobody else is going to expect." And I think outside of the question of power levels and who's going to win in a wrestling match and whose name do I put first, I think that's an interesting character to write fundamentally. With where the new gods are concerned, specifically now coming to a question that's closer to the original question you asked in terms of power levels, I think because there's this question of power levels and because we try to put everything on a scale, I think it makes things fundamentally less interesting, right? Because no amount of conversation between the power level of whatever Batman and I don't know who else you want to pick, Lady Shiva, martial artist, right? versus the Spectre who changes entire multiverse. There's no way those two characters could feature in a story,
right,
and have one of them be taken seriously,
right,
over the other, or have both of them be taken equally seriously, right? But you do it all the time in comics. You have to do it all the time in comics. And so I think the beauty of it is not in power levels, but in differentiating powers and showing where one thing can start outweighing the other, right? Yeah, like sure, Morpheus is going to be uber powerful compared to everybody else in the DCU, or Lucifer, or the one that fell is going to be super powerful. But if you could get Lucifer and Lady Shiva to contest a battle in a ring where all they could do was throw punches at each other, Lady Shiva might have a chance.
right.
And so I think from a writing perspective, that is the interesting stuff. So to bring it closer to the New Gods thing, what we're doing, Evan and I, is we're taking these characters, and if you notice, Kirby never gave them any kind of specific powers. Like, great, Light Ray has light powers. What does that mean? What does that mean he's got light powers? He's like, oh yeah, they can turn into lasers. Yeah, but then there's I could give you a list of 1,000 other characters who can do lasers, right? Where this is where my sort of engineering background comes in. Well, light can exist in two states. There are particulate and wave nature of light, and as with any other substance, really. But that makes it interesting now to give him powers based on okay, he can exist in two states, and when he exists in a second state, his powers are completely wildly different from what we assume is possible to do with light. He can approach speeds of light. And so what does that do to his mass? Does he become a hyperdense body when he travels at the speed of light, And so there's interesting things to do there. But there's also silly, simple, very Kirby-esque things to do. Like, one of the things we brought up to Editorial, and we might actually get to do it here, is that why is Big Barda big, right? There's other bigger characters. So what's her power? Outside of she beats up people. And so we said, okay, what if Big Barda actually gets bigger the angrier she gets?
That would be fun for Evan to draw.
Also, can you imagine in the current DCU a scene where a kaiju Barda is walking through a city because she is super mad and she's just towering above buildings? That's gonna be fun to do. Stuff like that is where my interest in power levels lies.
That is ingenious. I need to see all of this happen out on the page. I mean, the artistic abilities that you and Evan and whoever else is going to be working on the book, just to be able to think whatever, hey, I can change this power set or manipulate it to whatever the story needs and then just make it cool because it's a comic book and we can do that in this medium. That sounds like creative fun.
yeah, and also like this is where we took from, we took inspiration from things like Bleach. Is yeah, absurd power levels, but still every fight feels like it has real stakes, and everything feels like, oh yeah, yeah, okay, it matters. And these powers are not they're not interesting because they're overpowered. They're interesting because they do fundamentally fun things with
Mm-hmm.
their powers, Like on one end there's a person who fires a cannon from her hand, but then on the other end is an immortal warrior who fights with an ink brush.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. And so that's the kind of stuff that we're interested in doing, and that you will more likely see us do with this book.
That just makes me so excited to see Evan's pages continuing on in the book. And obviously, it has to mean the world to work with Evan on a project like this where it's you two clearly in sync. I had been picking up the covers, of course, to Detective Comics because
Yeah,
it's Evan doing absolutely tremendous stuff on the covers. But then Dawn Runner, the hardcover I think came out earlier this week from Dark
yeah.
Horse, and now on You Gods. How is it like working with him on this project?
I mean, I love working with Evan, just period, because he's just a wonderful, lovely person, very creative, very intelligent in the way he approaches art, and very non-cynical in the way he approaches his art. He's not trying to be quick or do something easily. He's trying to do something well. And I think that's very rare to find in collaborators, even in an industry that's been around for so long, especially if you've been around for a really long time. It tends to make you kind of very workmanlike about stuff. And so it's great to find collaborators in that who are like, no, that's not for me. I want to be the guy who obsesses over one page to get it right. Like the funniest thing is like I always get notes from editors going like, oh, this artist doesn't like to draw horses, or this artist doesn't like to draw motorcycles. Like I recently sent a script to Anand that had like
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of horses in it. And I recently sent a script to Evan that has like, forget motorcycles, they're crazy vehicles in
Mm-hmm.
there. And the only thing I ever get back is excitement. Like, oh man, I haven't done this. It's going to be cool. And so I think it's really energizing to work with someone like that. And you can see that excitement pouring off of his pen, quote unquote, on every single page.
That is super awesome to hear, and that it's clear that you and whoever you're working with on these books are having fun, which
Yeah.
it translates to the page. Like I'm looking at the page with it's this specific one with if I could turn the
Yeah.
camera,
With Metron. Yeah.
Metron, and um, even the stuff in California. I'm like, it's clear that you two are so in sync, and that he's putting his all on the page, which makes it, as a reader, for me, um, even more exciting to hear that you're obviously going to continue, but it's clear that you guys are working together well. Um,
Yeah, no, it's great to hear that, and long may it continue. It's gonna be great.
that is awesome to hear. I have to ask also about Liv, because I think this is might be the first time, at least on video, I get to talk to you about the prophecy foretold, and also too with Scott and Barda's kid, which is going to be a very big part of your story. Uh, my question to you is, how did you creatively anyways come up in the process of what we name this kid? Because obviously the kid has to have a name, can't be nameless, or maybe it can be. I mean, I know you could write a story about that.
Yeah.
But also too, like the process too of Scott and Barda trying to figure out what to name their kid. How did that come about in your head, and also the characters who are in the story? How did they come about that as well?
Um, yeah, I knew I wanted the kid to be called Live Free because he was called Scott Free and he was an escape artist.
Right.
And I just went like, well, of course I have to do something like that with his kid. Um, and so I knew I needed her to be called Live Free. There were a few iterations of how do we get to do that went through, and then I think it was actually in conversation with Ben Mears, who's one of the editors
Mhm.
on the book, that we came up with like, oh yeah, Olivia, Liv, that makes complete sense. Let's do that. And yeah, it just worked. And as soon as we had it, everyone was like, yep, that's the name. That's perfect.
I could sort of see Barda in the back just like nodding along, even with the.
I mean,
Yeah, right.
technically, it was Granny Goodness who named him Scott Free in the
Right.
first place. So it just, if you were ever going to spite someone by naming your kid in response to something they did, I'm sure Barda would be on board for spiting Granny Goodness. So
I love the added depth of meaning. That is going to be. I mean, it's canon now. You said it.
yeah,
It's the
yeah.
writer intent, and that's now on the pages. That is super. Yeah, awesome to hear. I guess side question: have you ever delved into the world of Pokemon?
Pokemon?
Yes.
Not particularly. I watch absolutely everything in terms of anime stuff that is remotely kind of shonen-y or battle-y,
Hmm.
but I never got into the Pokemon stuff. I know a lot of people did. I tried watching like the first few episodes, and I was just like, I can't care about this.
That's fair. That's fair enough. Um, I feel you there. Um, I also have to ask.
Yeah,
Yes.
I feel like I have that view about all the sort of big ones. I mean, of course, Bleach is big and Naruto was big,
Mhm.
and I enjoyed all of those. But people keep asking me like, "Oh man, have you seen One Piece?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can't get past season one for some reason. Can't do it."
It's too bad. I completely understand. It doesn't hit with most people. I guess the other question that I also too have about new gods. We see the Parademon Storm in the first issue, and most
Yeah.
recently in Justice League Unlimited issue number 2, we also see a very similar Parademon Storm. Are those coincidental, or was that planned out ahead in time?
No, none of this is coincidental in that all of the creators were in a, in a writer's room talking to each other about stuff that happens. There's probably going to be a few Metron appearances here and there as well. The Darkseid stuff is heavily coordinated. Like Scott and I have a call at some point to talk about where these books go in the future. Um, and yet I wanted to address something in that on that note. I know some of the solicits say of 12, and so people keep going like, is this only a mini or a maxi or whatever we call them? Like, no, they're greenlit in 12 issue seasons, but the intention is to keep going as long as the book sustain itself. So not really a mini or a maxi, potentially an ongoing, as long as people keep ordering and reading. Yeah.
We will all be there. At least the people that include me will be there,
Yeah,
supporting the book.
yeah.
Obviously,
Hey, look, like if we stay close to the numbers we hit on number one, grand.
I'm so excited. Um, but you obviously talk about the connectivity tissue, not only from the reader to the book, but also amongst yourselves, right, with the creators and everybody who is part of the Earth Zero line of books. Where I'm glad that it isn't coincidental, because it's clear that you and everybody else have a big role to play along with each other for your books in this initiative. And in that too, it's funny because Mark Waid, when I talked to him, mentioned that he was planning to use Levi for Justice League Unlimited.
Mm.
But the thing is, he didn't know that Alec Holland wasn't the current Swamp Thing, so he went back, read your book, read your Swamp
Mm.
Thing run, obviously, and said that he absolutely loved it and is now using Levi. Like, what does that mean, I guess, to you to see that not only are creators you're working in tandem together across a line
Mm.
of books, but also to see that people are reading your stuff and really enjoying it too.
Yeah, I mean, look, I said to you earlier, I'm
Mhm.
not the kind of person who needs kind of external validation.
Right.
And then people keep asking me about awards and stuff, and my books have been nominated and won a bunch of awards. And while I'm super appreciative of those, like I don't lose sleep over not winning
Mhm.
something. But the stuff that stays with me for years and years and years is when a creator I love and respect reaches out and goes, I love this, that what you're doing with this. Like that will stay with me forever. And always had moments like that. I very distinctly remember. Um, remember Brian Azzarello stopping me while I was walking through a bar in Florida and going like, "Your Swamp Thing is the only book I'm picking up month to month." So I was like, "Oh, that's great." Um, you know, I've gushed at Mark about a lot of his earlier work, like Kingdom Come, obviously is amazing, but also, um, what was that? Unbreakable,
Irredeemable.
irredeemable. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Um, yeah, I love that series as well. And obviously, Mark's take on Superman has been great in a bunch of books. Um, and so I told him all that, and so to hear, and he's reached out to me before to say, hey, you're doing some excellent work. So great to hear. Jeff Lemare's reached out to say that. Great to hear. You know, Garth Ennis, Warren Ellis both mentioned it. So yeah, these are all creators that, when I say I love comics, it's largely their work that I read. So yeah,
That is so awesome to hear. And it just makes me again feel more comfortable and happy that you guys are not in the same room. Like all the books are in tandem, and
yeah,
they all clearly have a distinct voice and the path that they're taking along in the future to be able to say, hey, like we got these books, and they're being treated with love and care and people that are passionate about the works that they're in. So I really, really do appreciate hearing that from you,
yeah.
which is super awesome in that as well. I guess a couple of last questions before I ask you some other questions about your other books. The first one of which is, this is a slight continuity question because my mind sometimes, I mean, you know how continuity is for people. Some people see like, hey, like this one character appeared in this one-off random book, but doesn't here, like what's going on there. So forgive me for asking, but I know that because Metrom does appear in this book,
Yeah,
but I remember, because I as a kid was reading Jeff Johns's and Jason Fabok's Justice League, and
yeah,
he got blown up on the chair
yeah,
by Dr. Manhattan, and a couple of years ago too, because I was also reading Scott Snyder's Justice League. The
yeah,
Source Wall was infamously blown up, and that
yeah.
being one of the bigger plot threads in the lead up to Death Metal. So when
Yeah.
you put them back in continuity, was that something that you minded, or was it just like this is a brand new book and we're not going to be doing that? How did that all pan out, if I may ask?
So I'm gonna tell you a story that is not from comics,
Okay.
right? It's from Hindu mythology, and um, essentially the story is about um, this pantheon of gods um, not wanting to take on a new member within them, and then this new member comes in and essentially creates a pillar of fire to show them, I'm eternal. You can follow this pillar up, and it goes beyond any height you can scale. You can follow this pillar down, and it reaches to depths beyond any you can scale. And in doing so, demonstrates to the other gods the greatness of his existence, and they must acknowledge him as being one of them, if you will. Now, in some uh, uh, portions of Hindu mythology, this is attributed to Shiva, which is the version I've heard. But I'm also aware of another version where this is attributed to Vishnu. Um, and scholars for years have argued over which version is correct. But the real answer is both versions are correct, and that they're all forms of each other, and that contradiction is inherent to any mythology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, King Arthur. You remember the story about him pulling the sword from the stone?
Mm-hmm.
But then surely you also remember the story about him getting the sword from the lady in the lake.
Right.
Now, which one's true? Where did he get the sword from? Were they two different swords? Is the lady in the lake also a stone? What's happening? And I think that's how mythologies work. They're written by different people at different points in time to mean different things. And surely, if there is a place where we could justify a thing constructing itself back, putting itself back together, surely an entity that is meant to be infinite and ununderstandable as a source wall is capable of going, no, I still exist. You can maybe in your version of events you saw me blown up, but I still exist. Maybe you can kill Metron a gajillion times, and he'll keep coming back on his chair because who is to say there is only one version of Metron? Who is to say this is not a character who could cross all of time and space, and so there aren't infinite versions of Metron able to be present at any point in time and space at any given time, regardless of how many times he has died.
That is fascinating. I have never looked at it that way, but I am going to be using that as the mythological continuity excuse for all of the books I read from now on.
Yeah. Genuinely, I think there's more joy in doing that. Like, without giving too much away, I'm doing a book at DC right now for another character that hasn't been seen in some 40, 50 years, that had 3 different origins in their continuity. And one of them, the original, the other origin was the character that they were based off of, but weren't called the same thing for some reason. And then the third origin is a New 52 rebirth of that era. I think it was New 52 origin.
Right.
And so I'm doing a story now that says, no, actually all 3 origins are true, and here's why. And that's only possible if you look at all of comic book storytelling, not as linear continuity, but as simultaneous mythological continuity.
That makes it so much easier for my brain to wrap and think about if you just don't have this straight line of saying this happened here, this happened that. This is actually what you were alluding to earlier with the power levels.
Yeah, but I mean, I also want you to think of like nothing in actual nature that has any kind of scale to it ever happens linearly.
Right.
Like most people love to think about. I'm gonna go off on a complete tangent.
Please
so forgive me, but
please do.
But people think about the universe and they go like, well, the Big Bang happened, and then everything moves away from the center and keeps exploding, right? Going farther and farther and farther, and that's how the universe is big. And so the universe is constantly moving, and we can never get to the end of it. All of those things are true, but it's also true then if the universe is constantly moving, right? And in space, there's no friction, so nothing is ever slowing down. And if at the explosion you imagine there was also light, that means there are objects that are moving at the speed of light at the edge of the universe. The longer and faster they move, they will likely turn into super dense particles that will have their own big bangs. And so will give rise to more universes at the edges of this one.
Right.
So if you then imagine at the edge of every universe are infinite other big bangs giving rise to infinite other universes, you could never explain with any kind of linearity because you don't have a starting point. What if you're, the 1 millionth big bang at the edge of some other universe? That means there is no beginning to you. That means there is no end. If there's no beginning and end, there's no linearity.
I'm mind blown because this is something that I remembered from my AP Physics class that I took back in high school. I guess just stuck in the back of my head.
Yeah, I mean, but also like it is a valid theory, right? It's called infinite proliferation, and that means nothing has any beginning or end. And so our need to look at linearity is only so that we can simplify things to our own frame of reference.
When the universe is much more complex.
Yes. So if you look at continuity that way, then it makes sense. Your need for a linear continuity is to talk about whatever you're talking about at the moment. The moment you try to say that it applies to everything, it's impossible because it doesn't apply to everything, because not everything is linear.
Life makes a lot more sense now. I appreciate you for giving me that perspective. Wonderful stuff. My gosh. Can't tell you how much. Big thank you for that. And I guess to end on the note of new gods before we get into some other questions that I had from your other books, because you're also prolific writer and all that. Darkseid, I guess like we talked about this earlier, right? Because you talked with some of the new gods being in this different spot with Darkseid not being in the picture as part of the DC All In special, and obviously with the long explanation that you had of mythology and how not everything is linear. So I guess my question would be, did you when you tackled this specific story, was it always did you envision not having Darkseid into the fold and having to wrap your mind around that, or was he something that you wanted to put into your story, but because of the external circumstances, you have to sort of shift away from that a bit?
No, I mean it's interesting. When I originally had the idea, the whole dark side thing was a point of conversation even then. I think it was like 3, 4 years before I actually started working on it. Um, but it was already a point of conversation because I think even at that time, Darkseid had been in so many books,
Mm-hmm.
and that DC editorial was like, it's always Darkseid. He's the bad guy always, and it's a little bit repetitive to be making him the bad guy at the end of everything. So can we like put him in cold storage for a while? And we did. So I was like, yeah, I don't need to base my run around Darkseid. There's enough. Like I said, I want to use the rest of the cast. So maybe having the one who takes up all the oxygen in the room is not the best idea. So we said, great, no Darkseid. Here's my story, and then time's a circle. So I work on detective, come back to this. It's time to start working on this, and people start talking about the all in absolute initiative. And Scott goes like, yeah, well, Darkseid is going to be gone, and we go, okay, great, that's a perfect fit because that's already in the story.
That is awesome to hear. And it's even cooler that, like I said earlier, Justice League Unlimited 2 having the Parademon Storm and even Challengers of the Unknown #1 tackling some of the
Yeah,
same dark side residue that is
yeah,
going on in
yeah.
the that is really cool to see. Again, all of you guys working and forming together. Which makes me even more happy for the rest of New Gods, which you can pick up at your local comic shop or whatever retailer that you buy from. We want to make this an ongoing, guys. We need to make this. It already is an ongoing,
It,
obviously, but
it
I
is
would
an
love no.
ongoing.
It's an ongoing, but
Just
no real
keep
numbers.
renewing it for
Right,
years.
right.
Yeah.
I because I want this to hit not a like I want this to hit like 50 or 100 or whatever the high number is without having to do the #1 with the Legacy 13 on the bottom of it, like you know how Marvel
Yeah,
often does
yeah,
it, and
yeah,
that's what I
yeah.
mean in that. But yes, pick up this book at your shop, guys. Not you will not be disappointed at all by it. But I do want to get to a couple of your other DC slash what etc. work because I have been floored by pretty much all the books that you have written from DC. And then obviously you just came off of a fantastic run of Detective Comics with so many amazing and talented artists. Not limited
Yes.
to Ivan Reyes, Albuquerque, Gillum March, Federici, so many amazing creators.
Jason Shaw,
Sean,
exactly.
yep. And even Liam Sharp, who's local or was local
Yeah.
to my area, love his
Oh,
stuff.
really?
Yeah, he was he's a super close friend of my comic shop, and he had to move back to England not too long
Yeah.
ago. But love that guy. I'm actually surprised too because he still remembers my name because I used to work at my comic shop. Became
Sure.
some friends. But anyways, um, for Detective Comics, was it difficult to get DC to bite on this uh, opera storyline that was divided into smaller sub arcs. Like obviously that had to be a big commitment from you with the different take on Batman. But did how did that? I guess how did you convince DC to say we need to be able to do this?
I mean, to be honest, they were just excited. There was no convincing required. Um, I think, like I said, the question was, they went, "What do you want to do next?" And I said, "I want to take on detective." Um, and they were like, "Okay, what's your take?" And I went, there's this musical, elevated, sort of weirdly theatrical drama take I have on Batman. Um, and I think the only question they had was like, okay, but that's going to feel weird tying into all the mainstream continuity Batman stuff. So do you want to tie in? Do you think these stories run in parallel? What do you want to do? And I said, well, the Batman book is already going to give your readers the sort of super soldier, kind of tough guy Batman thing. Why would I want to do another book that does the same thing? Like, this is also a Batman book. Why don't I just go off on a tangent and do something weird and different and interesting? And I think they were on board from the very beginning. So it didn't really take a lot of convincing.
That's all because that's awesome to hear. Because again, like you had mentioned earlier multiple times, DC now comes up to you and asks what you want, like what do you want to do, which like you've said
Which
before.
I mean,
Right.
it's not even now. Like it's where I would always like to be as a creator, regardless of big, small, famous, not famous, good sales, bad sales. I would always like to be in a position where I am creating the concept for what I want to do because the alternative is uninteresting to me. I'm not interested in plugging into an existing narrative, just going like, great, I will type you stories that exist within the framework of what you've asked me to do. Um, even with something like Catwoman, where I came into the book in the middle of a run, um, I still went, yeah, okay, cool, we're gonna do Catwoman as Ocean's 11, and essentially that was my run. Even with something like Justice League Dark, I knew I was gonna write a chunk of the issues to get James's story to a point where we could give it an ending, and then immediately I knew that I had this Merlin story that I wanted to tell.
Hmm.
Um, and so Justice League Dark contending with Arthuriana or the contemporary ramifications of Arthuriana. And it was kind of interesting to me. And so, um, yeah, never took any convincing because that's how I've always worked. I wouldn't take on a book if I didn't have something new and interesting to do with it.
Because yeah, I actually just got finished reading this extremely large large book that
Omnibus,
yeah, the
yeah,
large
yeah,
omnibus that you have had more than a half of the book in your hands in your pen,
yeah.
and being able to see your spin and take on it again was I partly like scared that Tynan, who I had sort of had a like connection with for years because I'm reading a lot of his other Batman stuff, Detective Comics. Was I going to be able to go from that to somebody who I'd never read, never heard of, and you giving it such a unique voice to it was super, super thrilling for me as a reader, but also knowing that well, I can like get this other person's like books now because there's a level of trust there, and also the fact that you had such a distinct style
Mm.
from Tynan's run, which was nice to
Yeah, yeah. I think James and I both enjoyed the same things about Justice League Dark, but I think we enjoyed them in different ways. And hopefully, yeah, a lot of that comes through in the book as well. And it wouldn't be interesting if all the writers at a company were doing the same thing over and over again. So
right
I'm
because
I'm glad I'm glad it was different and yet struck a chord with you.
I'm really happy that I was finally able because yeah, this was a 1,500 plus page book. It definitely was not an overnight for me as much as I wanted to.
Sure.
But seeing you fill in the threads with the Upside Down Man, stuff with Arthur and everything else, and even too in
Yeah.
the I remember that I had to buy some of the Justice League issues because my I was working at my comic shop during the time, and my comic book store owner, who I'd known for years, told me the year before that DC was thinking of doing backups in certain issues while having the main story throughout there. And I had no idea that JLD was going to be part of Justice League with
Mm.
your books being 6 to 8 pagers, not like long stories, but they're all wonderfully collected in here. But it was still nice to see that happening. I'm just kind of partly because you obviously had the you had your you had your kid, not like you had mentioned earlier, and now
Yeah.
being a dad, and I really wish that you would have seen the end run throughout, and also that they continued Justice League Dark. Um, is there any sadness that you never got to see that, and even Catwoman come to like a conclusion that you wanted to see?
I mean, not really. Uh, I am but a tiny speck on the tapestry of comics that will continue long after I've stopped writing them and that existed long before me. You have to take your time on these characters with that in mind. You can't be super precious about, oh, I have to get the room to finish this thing. Like with JLD, honestly, it was my decision because I was writing these 10-page backups, but honestly, it felt to me creatively like they were more exhausting than working on 22-page issues because I had to deliver story that I felt was creatively rewarding, but deliver it in half the space. And so I had to do all kind of narrative jugglery to be able to go, okay, this still works as a story. This still works. I would still be happy reading 10 pages of this,
Right.
you know? Um, and so it was almost double work because, every 20 pages coming up with a cliffhanger and working up to that dramatic tension is fine. When you have to do that every 10 pages, then you're having to work dramatic tension. It's like I said, if you take the breathing analogy, imagine me breathing at twice the rate that I'm breathing just to be able to tell you a monthly story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I just went like, you know what? Like I've shown you I can do this. Put me on a 20-page per issue book, not a 10-page per issue book.
Right.
And I had the option to do that with Swamp Thing, and it was really a question of like, do you want to do both Swamp Thing and JLD at the same time, or what do you want to move on to? And I said, look, I'm gonna take on Swamp Thing, and I'll take on like a Black Label book or another series that lets me stretch my muscles a little bit.
And it's again been cool to see you go from Justice League Dark over to do this large ensemble with cosmic entities. And so that has been
Yeah,
really
yeah.
awesome to see. Um,
People were like, "Are these gods also going to be doing magic stuff?" And I was like, "No, because I did magic stuff, and now I'm gonna do cool science stuff that will look like magic to you."
I'm really glad that that panned out in your favor. And also too with Detective, I know that this has
Yeah,
been something that's been like big on your plate, and getting to write Batman in the way that you wanted to, and seeing it unfold for the 28 issues and the annual of amazing slow
yeah,
burn. Um, I guess twofold question. The first is a lot of my viewers are also omnibus collectors, and they have
yeah.
been asking from like the last like 6 days. You probably have also said it's on interviews. Dom, ask Ron V if he can talk to DC about putting an omnibus of this out because we
I
have
mean,
had
I don't need to.
right.
I don't need to talk to them. I had an actual email from DC going like, "Cool, we're working on the omnibus. We'll let you know more when the details come out." So I'm sure there's an omnibus in the works,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure when I know when it's actually coming out, I will be more than happy to pass that information along. But yeah, there's definitely an omnibus coming. The book did really, really well, especially in its collections. I know I had publishers from multiple countries in Europe reach out, going like, "This book is doing amazingly well in collections," and I'm glad to see that the American market will also get a nice hardcover,
Mm-hmm.
pretty package put together. I love those French editions,
Me
so
too.
I'm always happy when like even with my independent stuff, Laila, Starr, Red Flavors, both of those are collecting, are getting deluxe hardcovers, and so it's always nice to hear when that happens with the DC stuff as well.
Right.
DC are like, yeah, we're gonna do a detective omnibus. I think there's talk about doing a Swamp Thing omnibus as well, or not omnibus, but a
Deluxe
collection.
hardcover. Right.
Yeah, yeah. exactly. So
That's so awesome to hear. Because I have I'm friends with Zero, who writes for Gatecrashers.
yeah,
On and I was talking to them about volumes 4 and 5, because volumes 4 and 5 are gonna have the new DC Bullet logo on the
yeah,
book. And I remember them like being angry about it. And I just said like, I love it's not a shelf to me. It's not a DC shelf to me if there wasn't some inconsistency there. Like seeing on the spines, it's like the Timeless Rebirth logo, and then the transition over to Volume 4 and 5, and it's, oh hey, the Bullet logo's on here. But I still think it's super cool. Well, obviously being able to have it in any collected form, like to think about that, so
yeah.
readers in the future will be able to read your work, have it immortalized in that format is, I think that has to be like one of the biggest uh, proud moments for you, like seeing people, hey, like I got volume 1 of Gotham Nocturne, I'm gonna be able to read it finally.
Yes, I mean, look, it's always a heartwarming, you know, reaffirming moment that people respond and love these books so well. But I'm also like equally happy to see someone with a self-bound collection of my, single issues that they've put together. I, I'm in love with the act of reading. Not so much with the act of collecting. Like, if collectors or like people who love their bookshelves to look really pretty ever came over to my place, I would guarantee you would have like a nervous breakdown. Like, there are comics strewn over my floor. I walk on them sometimes without noticing. My kids like torn up my comps
Oh.
sometimes. I've got like boxes full of stuff that was sent over to me that's probably valuable, but I don't. I believe in the transient quality of stories. The stories become permanent objects that are revered, edified, objectified. Then I don't know. To me, they lose their fluidity, their magic. Uh, yeah, yeah. I would. If you ever find me out in the world carrying a book, it'll be like dog-eared. There'll be stuff underlined, pages torn because I slept on it at some point. So yeah, never been one to be sort of enamored with the beauty of the object that is the book. But also on the same note, I totally get it. Those French editions look
They
amazing.
do.
So I am happy that everyone's getting an amazing looking edition of the book.
Right, but it's the stuff on the inside, I think, that matters more
Yeah, yeah,
often,
exactly.
right?
And so I'm no more or less proud of my own work because it's getting a hardcover. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Right. And I guess on that same front too, I have to quickly enamor you with my fantastic deluxe hardcover of Many That's a Layla Starr, something that
Nice.
I
Yeah.
had been looking forward to for such a long time, but because of the living situation I'm in right now, being in college and not having enough money, but still wanting to have my books, look good for presentation, for videos, whatever they might be, I was like, I'll wait for a deluxe hardcover on this, and I felt ashamed because when the trade came out, I had slept so much on it, and people are telling me all these different things, and I'm like, yeah, I'll wait for it. And then when the book comes out, I finally get a chance to sit down and read. There are like 3 pages in this book with tears, like actual human tears. The pages are like kind of I don't know, like I like emotionally like put myself like through the ringer. You put me emotionally through the ringer with this book, so I have to say,
No, no, you did it yourself. You had it right the first time.
but no, it was just a fantastic story on the little moments in life, and being able to cherish a lot of um, a lot of the moments that I think we tend to overlook. But then when you look through the lens of someone else, it's, can you put your own spin on it? And it was something to me that um, I just, no more words. Like for me, it got me to tears, and it's one of my favorite indies ever. So I just wanted to say, thank you on that front for putting this book out there. I didn't know that I needed it back when I read it last year, but big thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I needed to write that story since I was about 16. I just didn't know how to write it until I was 30 something. So it spent a huge amount of time in my head. So it was finally cathartic getting to put it down on paper as well.
Oh man, no, that's awesome to hear, and I still need to finish Rare Flavors. I don't know if you did hear, but Boom is putting out a deluxe of it next year.
Yeah, yeah,
In June. So that
yeah. We were just informed a couple of weeks ago that they were like, "Hey, we're looking at putting out a deluxe hardcover. Would you guys want to do extra matter, forwards, afterwards, etc., etc." So yeah, I'm sure that will come out, and I've had a few people say Instagram me their lunches and dinners based off of recipes in the book. So I'm
that's
happy to
so
see that.
awesome.
The
Like,
coolest thing, to go back to the creator
mhm.
aspect of it. Um, well, hopefully Giuseppe Camuncoli, who did art on some of my favorite Hellblazer comic issues,
Mhm.
um, is a big foodie and didn't know about this book. And I met him at a convention recently. And so now he's just like, there's an Italian edition coming. I'm going to read it, which is great. But also had a message from a sort of Michelin star chef on Instagram who said, I bought multiple copies of this for my entire kitchen. So I was like, that's amazing
That
to
is
me. As
spectacular.
someone who is purely an amateur chef, to be told by a Michelin star chef that it encapsulates why people should love food is great.
And I guess on that front too, I assume, but the perspective that you're putting into these books, and obviously, um, all of the different books you've done, whether it's creator owned or big two, on how important your culture is and your experiences are. Could you give me your take on how important it is for not only you, obviously, but to envelop the reader in your culture and your take on the world at large in all of your books?
I
Because
mean, really, it is the fundamental end of our storytelling, right? Like, if we leave behind the structural and political content of my culture, your culture, all of that, forget all of that. Why do you sit down in a bar with somebody else and grab a drink and talk to them? Why do that in the first place? Why tell them what you did something 4 weeks ago? Why tell them about your relationship with your mother, for example? The whole point of any kind of human conversation, expression, consumption is to say, like, this is my experience of life, and have that return to you with somebody else going, yes, this is also my experience, or I understand why this is your experience, or this is not my experience at all, it's different. The whole idea of human connection is one of empathy. You may not sympathize, but you will at least empathize with someone telling you, this is my experience of life. And telling stories rooted in your culture, my culture, somebody else's culture, the whole endeavor is to create a sense of, this is how the world is for me. Is it the same way for you? Now, sometimes it is. Sometimes, I'll get a message from someone from India who's kind of mostly grown up in the States, and they'll go, I didn't really love comics because I felt like they had nothing to do with my world. And I read Laila Starr, I read Rare Flavors, and suddenly I feel like comics are part of my culture as well, which is great to hear. Or sometimes I got a message from a gentleman who I know now in Scotland, who said, reading Graffiti's Wall, which is on your screen right now. Nice segue there. Reading Graffiti's Wall had made him have the same reaction you did. He cried because he was like, I've never been to Mumbai, but this story felt like me growing up with my friends and after we had moved to Glasgow. And even though they were completely different cultures, do you see the beauty in two cultures being entire
Mhm.
worlds apart and yet having an emotional connection? Like, what else do you need to understand that human beings are fundamentally connected regardless of where they come from?
That's touching to hear. And as somebody, because I grew up in the Philippines before I moved over here to the States, and it
Yeah,
felt like there was still someone, outside that, like, yes, it's not just about, the urban slash suburban living in an American city, that, like, oh, there are other stories out there that need to be
yeah.
told. Like, I do feel like that is very
But
important.
not only do they need to be told, but they need to feel like they're part of this world we live in. I mean,
Mhm.
you could live in, I don't know, Idaho, Ohio, anywhere in the middle of the states where maybe you're not as metropolitan as a lot of other areas. I guarantee you there's an Indian person or a person of Indian origin somewhere within a 10-mile radius, right?
Mhm.
Just by the sheer fact that there are so many of us. Now, maybe that person's, born and brought up in the same city and town that you were, and maybe there's nothing, but surely their experience of their parents who maybe moved there, their experience of their grandparents who maybe moved there is different from yours. And would it not behoove you to understand why the guy who lives next door to you, lights lamps every Diwali instead of putting up a Christmas tree at home?
Right.
Of course it would. Even and so I think fundamentally stories should be reflective of the times that we live in. And tell you a story. My wife and I had our honeymoon in Greece, and we went to this remote island where you had to take a boat just to get there. The population is tiny. Everyone works only until about 2 in the afternoon, and then they're like, "Nah, we're done." On that island, there's maybe three hotels, and one of the hotels was run by, I kid you not, two identical twins who were born in Punjab in India,
No
and we
way.
had no
What?
idea, no idea. We walked into this
What?
hotel in Greece on an island, and there's like two Punjabi identical twins going like, "Oh, hello, yeah, we're from India as well," and that's the world we live in now. And like you said, you grew up in the Philippines before you were in the States. I'm assuming you're in the
Mhm.
States.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't think I've met anyone in my sort of recent past who hasn't had some experience of living somewhere else or traveling somewhere or growing up with someone who had experienced something like that. And if that is so much part of our world, what we should be really asking this question to is creators who never put their in their comics and go like, what kind of world are you setting your comic in where none of these things exist, none of these things outside of your own culture, outside of your own view of the world exist? And to be very honest, I think a lot of the media that we see today exists as it is because it doesn't come from a place of culture. It comes from a place of consumption.
Mhm.
Like most people, most sort of genre stories you see are written and created, at least in my view, the majority of stuff that I don't really enjoy is written and created by creators who have only read, written, and consumed other comic books or other films or other TV. Like you are distilling your version of a story that you saw somewhere. There is nothing of your own lived experience in that book. Whereas even in my Batman story,
Mhm.
a conversation with a doctor who's going like, maybe you should slow down a little bit.
Mhm.
It's from my own life. Even in my New God story, watching a father be partial to a sibling in my own story, much like you explained earlier. And there has to be some measure of lived experience in your stories. Otherwise, they're gonna feel like a copy of a copy that you saw somewhere once and you forgot in like the next 10 seconds.
That is a wonderful explanation. It all brings back to the thing we were talking about earlier with seeking out the humanity in the stories and finding ways to thread ourselves
Yeah,
into these
yeah,
books. It's
and
a
and
yeah.
and I think that that's the important bit. Like humanity is beautiful and exciting. Just as I think it was, I'm paraphrasing George Saunders, who's one of my favorite short story writers, who said, "The world is just as beautiful and exciting as it was when you were 8 years old. All you have to do is go out and actually look at it."
That is a wonderful quote. I have learned so much in the last 1.5 hours from our conversation with, and honestly, like getting your worldview challenge should not be this stark task for anybody. I think the most interesting thing, the best thing that you can do, is try to experience other cultures, whatever it might be, to see, like, envelop yourself in that. You don't want to be
Just
just stuck in the same
experience.
bubble.
You don't even have to try to experience
Mm-hmm.
other
Right.
cultures. Just try not to live in your own bubble.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you have to do is walk outside your door and decide to walk into a new neighborhood that you haven't walked into before. Don't go drink at the same bar. Drink at a different bar. Drink with a bunch of different people. Don't be afraid of saying hi to strangers. Say hi to strangers like you're grown up now,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
These are life lessons from Ramvi, everybody. This is what we read comics for, in my opinion. And by golly, I have again learned so much today about the world that we both live in, and looking at the medium and just life in a different lens than so many others that I have.
I mean, look, none of this is particularly of my own making. I think, despite all the other stories around him, like when Gaiman was asked for advice for young writers, he said, okay, put down your pen and paper and go out and experience the world and get your heart broken, and then you will have something to write about. I think the great things that we hold up as wonderful examples of writing from our own history are all written by people and authors who, experienced something, anything, other than, sitting in front of a screen and watching videos and going like, I know the world because, yeah, but you only know the world on a 4-inch or 5-inch by 12-inch screen. The world is so much bigger and has so much more depth.
It does, and like you said earlier, it's not linear. It's not on a scale. It is so fascinating and complex to the point where we can't even begin to comprehend it. But the best thing that we can do is actually go out and experience that by talking with different people, and looking at because we have so many different walks of life that so many people like are out there. We have such a diverse track of different voices and everyone else. It just feels like sometimes like we only, like you said, we bubble ourselves, and we don't want to experience it, but we should be able to, in that case.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, certainly why I write. So, yeah.
And that is why we want to continue. I want to continue to read on whatever your next books are, and of course the tease earlier with the character that you cannot say for confidentiality reasons, but I'm very excited.
Well, we should be expecting to see an announcement next month, because it's about to go into solicits.
Okay,
so,
I can't wait for that, and you can of course check out those solicitations at comicreleases.com, where we do also get all of the DC information. Ramvi, I have one final quick question to New Gods to ask, because it just slipped my mind. I saw Maxwell Lord in issue 1, and Maxwell Lord, of course, is very infamous for not only being the mastermind, or one of the masterminds behind Infinite Crisis in 2005, but was also on the same Justice League team as Scott Free in the 90s. Can you tease us anything about Max Lord being snuffed?
Well, so the last we remember of Max Lord was he was put into a coma.
He was.
And he lay there. And he was woken by your favorite agent and mine, at least Agent Provocateur in my New Gods book. And he was woken and given divine purpose. And he has returned to us now changed. And how and why and what his endeavors are, we shall see in issue 2.
So pick up issue 2 at your local comic shop, guys. And of course, this has been a wonderful conversation with Ram V. Ram, where can people find you out there on the internet, besides obviously reading your books?
I mean, currently I'm on Twitter, although that feels like saying currently I'm standing on the 14th floor of a building that is fast collapsing into a flaming pile of bleep. So find me on Twitter if you dare. But I'm also on Blue Sky. But I don't know that I've kind of grown tired of social media and the constant whatever connection of it. I get enough of it writing my books. So if you really want to follow my work and if you really want to encourage me to be good about this, go join my newsletter. It's flybysoul.com. Sign up, subscribe, and I will endeavor to put out a newsletter more regularly. I might start up a creator Discord or a creator forums kind of thing where we get a bunch of people to come in and have real conversations and not pretend to be influencers everywhere.
That would be fun, and you gotta invite me to that at some point.
Yeah. You will certainly have an invite.
Is awesome. Well, we'd like to thank Ram V for his time and also the hurdles that we both have had to jump through because of scheduling issues. But I was just so lucky and honored to have spent the last 1.5 hours talking about comics with you, and I know that if you guys are listening, I know that you guys have probably been enlightened too. So I'd like to thank you, Ram, for joining me and talking about life. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. I was in vocal form today, so you caught me on a talkative day.
Yes, awesome stuff. But that is going to be it for me. I am Dom of X UBU. Take care and Happy New Year to wherever you might be.
Yeah. Happy holidays and Happy New Year to you all.